And now, here's Grace and Peter interviewing Drew Stelljes.
My name is Drew Stelljes, and I have had the pleasure of working at William & Mary for 22 years. I serve as the Associate Vice President for Student Engagement and Leadership, and I teach courses out of the William & Mary Washington Center. You know, we're in a period of time, both in William & Mary and across the nation, where trust in institutions is frayed. And there's been a leading up to the pandemic. This wasn't something that was struck just because of the pandemic, but trust in institutions is really frayed. And so you want to start off first by thinking about how do you build or restore trust. And researchers sort of share with us that how you build trust is by, in part, showing up in the moments when things really matter. And so, for example, trust is built among friends when you see your friend show up for you when you are at your worst, or when you see a friend show up when, God forbid, someone in your family has passed away and they attend the funeral. Or trust is built when they show up and know things or details that are important to you, but you didn't think they were really going to be important to that person. Recognizing that, for example, if you're a middle school kid and your friend recognizes that you're being taken advantage of, or you're being bullied, and they take good care of you, that's how trust is built. And so trust then leads to this willingness and an ability to express emotion, to be emotional with one another. And that expression of emotion leads to the ability to empathize. And we can talk a whole lot about what empathy is, but it's just the intentional ability and to feel how others are feeling. And we can go into more detail with that as well. But I think trust is where it starts.
I think you hit on a key point, this moment within our nation, and just, even kind of, it's been a long buildup, there isn't a lot of trust, and especially in light of a lot of uncertainty. That's been our catchphrase for the past year and a half. I think a lot of us are wondering, where do we place our trust, and, how can we build that back up? And so I think it is important that when it comes to building community, when it comes to reestablishing that trust, that we do look to empathy first, and that we do start showing up for one another, and that, I can see how that is so important to, creating that trust that is so crucial to building back up the community that in many ways we've lost just due to the external circumstances that have just been plaguing our world for the past year and a half. As a professor, you formed some amazing bonds with your students. And so I would love to hear more about, what is your secret when it comes to empathy? You kind of hinted that you had more to say on that. Does that play into how you teach and how you connect with your students?
Thanks for that. That's a high compliment to say that, I've been able to form good relationship and rapport with students. I think that for me, the strategy that works is to certainly bring myself to class. And so, the beginning of the semester is really important to develop that rapport and relationship. And it's important for me to be able to share a little bit about my personhood, about who I am, and about what I believe in and what I value, so that we can start to build a sense of community in the classroom. And that hopefully gives all the students the space, to the extent that they're comfortable, to share some of that as well. So if I know you, and if I look you in the eye and I really feel like I know a little bit about who you are, first of all, I have a connection to you, but also it's going to be a little bit harder for me to be upset with you. So I'm starting to build that sense of rapport or trust with you, because I know who you are. I know where you come from. I know maybe what's motivating you, but I also know some of the things that you might be afraid of. And oftentimes that fear of something, of the possible, is part of the reason that people respond with a big and intense emotional response to something that that really could be for the reason of that they maybe are scared or concerned about something.
And do you think having a stronger, or at least a more stable relationship between professor and student, having that kind of rapport, do you think that has ever negatively affected a student's learning ability in class? Do you think there's kind of only positives? do you think there's any correlation at all between like how a professor and student get along and how well that student performs in the class?
Well, a couple things to that I would say certainly is just like any good relationship, you want to be able to set boundaries. And I think of it, let me start by sharing what I would say is in sort of a personal relationship and how you set boundaries, whether that's with a friendship or a loved one. The boundaries that you're setting is that you respect yourself, I respect you, and we're coming into this with a respectful relationship. And so the boundaries that you set as a professor and a student, in some ways, are sort of self-created. You know that there is a syllabus. The syllabus serves as both the contract for what I have to provide to you, so that you learn the most and the best that you can, and it's also it's our roadmap. And I'm also saying to you that as a result of me putting this together, I've developed a plan, and the plan is going to get us from A to Z. It's going to get us, all these learning objectives are going to be completed as a result. And so in some ways it starts with this idea that I've worked really hard to try to give you an experience that meets your high standards, because you are here to get the best possible education you can. And it's my responsibility, and it's a high responsibility, for me to figure out a way for you to succeed in the course. And it starts with that learning contract and that roadmap.
And you mentioned a bit just now about like the work that you put in with like the syllabus and kind of the lengths that you go to kind of like establish that kind of relationship. Are there steps a student can take on their side of things, like on their end of the relationship, to kind of create more interaction with professors, and so like they can foster that kind of rapport on their end?
Yeah, that's a brave question, and I want to say it frame it in that perspective. Is it takes a lot of courage for a student to be able to have a rapport, a relationship, a communication with a professor. And that being said, that's what we want to do, right? Even though it takes bravery and courage, that's exactly what we want to do. Is we want to walk into that with imagining the opportunity for it. And so my recommendations to students would be to try that. I mean, I remember so vividly when I was an undergraduate being so enthralled with this professor I had, and after about a month's time in his class, I really wanted to get to know him better, and I was incredibly nervous to go to his office hours. But I did it because the interest in getting to know him better, both his academic interest and his personal interests, overrode the fear of the possibility of me being turned away. And it was it was an office hour that sincerely changed my life, because he gave me both some confidence and also a toolkit to imagine what my life could look like and how I myself could work in higher education as well. And so I would start off by saying to students is to be brave and to be willing to have that conversation, to show up, obviously. And when I say show up in class, I mean show up both physically and intellectually and emotionally to the very best you can each and every day. There is no doubt about it that each and every one of us bring into any setting, whether it's a work setting or an academic setting, the different things that are going on in our lives right now. And yet, if you can find ways to sort of control that emotion, that heavy emotion that you might be experiencing, before you walk into the classroom and say, it's here, that sadness that I'm experiencing, that anger that I'm feeling, the anxiety that it's palpable is here. And for the next 50 minutes or hour and a half, however long the class is, I'm going to do the very best I can to leave it in the hallway, or leave it back in my dorm room, or leave it in my apartment, so that I can bring the very best I can to the classroom, recognizing fully that I'm going to have to go back to it, that there are going to be emotions that I'm going to have to work through afterward. But in that moment, I will make, to the best I can, I will show up and make that course and that class my priority. I would also say that not every one of us, we're all human, not every one of us is really naturally gifted or professionally practiced at having good conversations. Conversation takes time, and it is an art that takes time and practice. And so to give a professor who may be a little clunky in that a little bit of grace and try a second time if it didn't go too well the first time. Those are a couple of suggestions I would have.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think when I look back on like some of the most memorable like moments that I've had in my time here, and I'm a senior now, it's been in moments and in classrooms where I have felt that communication can be open, where the professor is willing to communicate and willing to have conversations, even if it's maybe not about the lesson plan. You know, if it takes a different direction, they're willing to go with that. And their door is always open. And, you know, also when students are willing to be honest and open about where they're at. And so I guess a follow-up question with that is, you know, what is your advice for other professors? How can faculty members help to make the classroom a place that students feel like it can be an environment where communication is open? You know, yes, there are those healthy boundaries in place, but it's a place where learning can take place, where there's no fear for, you know, being wrong, where there's a place where communication is happening, where empathy is present, and where learning is occurring.
Well, when I was first starting teaching about 15 years ago, a mentor of mine shared with me that the reality is that right now my toolkit is not empty, but it's shallow. And the toolkit is the tools that you can use when the unexpecteds occur. The only thing we can expect is that there's going to be an unexpected, meaning a student's going to ask a question that you might not have a good response for, or students will want to take the class in a certain direction if you're going to open it up for discussion, or you have a guest speaker who introduces new topics that you weren't planning for. And as you go on, your toolkit gets fuller and fuller because you've had more and more experiences. And so first, I would say for faculty members who are newer is to recognize and honor that, you know, your toolkit will get fuller with experience. And at least in the beginning is to have somebody who's an informal coach who can be there for you after class or even as you prepare to help to kind of mentor you through some of those possibilities. And that's all to say that when you walk into a classroom, you're going to be able to share your expertise, and you want to be able to say to the students in the class that this is an opportunity for all of us to learn together, right? It's a learning experience. It's a learning adventure. It's a journey of learning over the next X number of weeks. And that, I think that sort of pulls down the veil of authority and sort of creates the possibility of curating something together. So we're going to go on a learning journey. It's going to be an experience together. Those are some of the things that I think you could do. As you get, you know, further along in your career, I think you start to develop whatever works for you. It becomes your own way of most effectively teaching and learning. And all that to be said, places like the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation are essential in a liberal arts setting because we are constantly reiterating on how to be the best possible teachers that we can because we're reimagining our courses each and every semester.
The Stelljes Podcast.
Students and teachers and community together.